Okay.
There is every likelihood, I'm afraid, that your marriage could end up now in a situation that carries you through to a divorce. Just because you've issued the divorce and you've started the process doesn't mean ease begins the next day.
Yeah.
You've got to deliver outcomes, you've got to deliver success, you've got to win. We are outstandingly brilliant at creating emotional blackmail. The courts don't like to assert a certain right or ownership over a child. So I have a significant male clientele. We've secured so many orders where we've retained residency in respect of the father. I think some people are better at putting in the work. You've got to wake up and want to put that work in every single day. There's no real issue between the spouses. So much has been said and done. Use me.
Good one. Welcome back to Social Untold. Today we're discussing a topic that impacts so many families, but the topic is already surrounded by a stigma. We're talking about divorce, family disputes, and the legal rights that come with it. In this episode, we'll be unpacking some of the toughest questions around divorce, why marriages today are struggling, how property and child custody battles are handled in UK, and even the role of social media and expectations in building relationships today. So let's get started. Naheed, welcome to Social Untold. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Meena.
It's a pleasure to have you. Naheed, tell me about your journey. What inspired you to get into divorce and family law, basically?
So it's quite an odd story, actually.
Yeah.
As I was going through my A-levels, I actually wanted to become a midwife.
Okay.
And I was studying sociology at the time, and I remember actually applying to university for a role to complete my midwifery studies. I'd gone through UCAS and I'd made the applications. And then I remember my sociology teacher saying to me, do you realize it's a lot of work, it's unsociable hours, you don't get paid very much. I think you would be very good in law. And I was like, law, okay. And it was really odd because I would say I fell into it. I'd never sort of, in a young age thought, right, I'm going to aspire to become a lawyer or go into law. It was something that I definitely fell into.
Yeah.
And I actually went and then completed my law studies after that conversation. Yeah, very, very oddly.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, who would have thought from a midwife to a lawyer?
Yeah, I think there's definite synergies. I think the fact that I've got a very nurturing personality.
Yeah.
So I love caring for people. And I guess at that time, babies and children was something that I felt really important about.
Yeah.
And then I fell into law, but I think that's why I ultimately ended up doing family law as opposed to commercial contracts or employment, because that was always something I was interested in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a lot of people, when they hear lawyer, they think, oh, a lot of money. Obviously, I mean, it is a plus thing. Lawyers do earn good, but what are the struggles behind their daily life? Because I'm sure you would, like a lawyer would have to deal with, I don't know, not one, but multiple cases at the same time. So what is your struggle like? What can you tell about that?
I think there is definitely a lot of media, a lot of films, they heighten the image of what a lawyer is like and what a lawyer may do.
Yeah.
In reality, the work involves you having very little time to yourself, very little time for your family.
Yeah.
You are often working around the clock to get cases prepared. There is extreme levels of pressure on you. You've got to have the ability to make decisions and significant decisions within extremely short periods of time. You've got to handle, particularly with family law, you've got to handle the emotion that someone is feeling. You've got to maneuver potentially their children, their family, the extended issues that they might be facing. For example, they've just lost their job, they are going through health issues. So you're kind of nurturing them through all of those difficulties, but you're also the problem person who has to find a resolve to their problems.
Yeah.
And that's the real,
There's a lot of pressure.
that's the real, the crux of the job is
Yeah.
not only are you dealing with the emotion, you've got to be the problem solver and then deliver those outcomes. So to become a successful lawyer, you've got to deliver outcomes, you've got to deliver success, you've got to win.
Yeah. And you spoke about, you know, lawyers usually don't have enough time to give to the family, right? Or to themselves.
Yeah.
I want to ask, do you have weekends, or you're working on weekends as well?
So I definitely try. And I always thought, Mina, that as I become more successful, I will get more time.
More time.
Unfortunately, for my sins, as I've become more successful, I've got less time.
Okay.
But I do try and make sure that over the weekends and in evenings, I, carve out time for my family, my children.
Yeah.
But it's challenging. It's challenging. Before I came here, I had to make sure, because my morning is going to be filled with this, that I make sure that I sent out 2 letters this morning.
Yeah.
If I didn't, that would have ramifications for someone being able to have contact at 3 p.m. today. So it's not even something you can leave for, I'll do that in the evening.
Yeah.
It's the pressure of it is such that it's speed is everything in the job that we do.
Okay.
And that places pressure on you in lots of ways.
So you see a lot of people coming to you for their problems, right? So what are some of the, many misconceptions about the divorce law that you see in UK?
I think people underestimate how simple or how easy this journey might be.
Okay.
What you've got to understand is whether you stay in a marriage and whether you decide to leave, none of that journey is going to be easy.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So what does single life look like for me once I take that decision? What does housing look like for me? What will this mean for my children? I've gone from having my children in my living room, in my home, every hour of the day.
Yeah.
How will I feel when they're not with me for 4 days at a time? These are not actually things we consider, because a lot of the time when those decisions are being made, it's from heightened emotion. It's because for a long period of time, sometimes maybe years, you've gone through a really tough time. You have felt that you're not yourself within your own home. You're finding it challenging, even co-parenting in respect to the children. But I think the misconception is what the reality of life looks like for people who then become separated, because just because you've issued the divorce and you've started the process doesn't mean ease begins the next day.
Yeah.
It's an entire process. Sometimes it takes us, the best part of 18 months to take people through that journey, making sure that they're aided with the tools. And like with any stressful trauma, it takes time for you to rebuild yourself.
Yeah.
And it's having that perception inside you that is something I'm going to have to work on and over time rebuild.
Yeah. In your career, have you ever come across any most uncomfortable situation, or while doing a case, that you would like to share?
Uncomfortable? How do you mean?
Like in I don't know, you said you deal with families and their problems. Obviously they have a lot of emotions heightened, and
I mean, Mina, every single case we deal with has its own challenges.
Yeah.
Every single case will have a period where you will have a plateau, everything's going swimmingly, maybe someone's behaving, but then something will erupt.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. We've got a case at the moment. We're dealing with finances. Over the weekend, there's been an incident, a significant incident where, unfortunately, the wife has found herself in a situation that she may not be able to continue living with the husband in the same house while we're conducting the financial separation because he's become abusive. So instead of focusing on the money, we've got to now think about, right, what injunctive relief, what applications to court are we going to have to make this week to make sure that life in the house is safe? So it's there. Challenges arise on different cases at different times, and that's a lot of it is dependent on, you're imagining a pressure cooker, and every case is there. It's all fine until that pressure explodes.
And do you see there's a difference between people from here and migrant spouses? Do they find different sort of challenges compared to each other while they're in a divorce situation, or is it particularly same?
I think a lot of the challenges are very similar.
Okay.
There are some nuances because where you've got maybe people based in the UK that are maybe second or third generation, they will have their families here.
So they have support.
They have support, but also it's not just the support. You are adhering to also the expectations of other people when you are going through this journey. My brother wants me to do this. My sister wants me to do this. I've got 10 people in my ear telling me what I should be doing. And the pressure of all of that, what I find is there's a lot of family involvement in South Asian divorces. Particularly in the UK, where the families are there, they're the ones that have been involved through the marriage. They're there, that they've seen the difficulties, and they're picking up the pieces. I think where I do have a lot of people, migrants from the South Asian subcontinent, coming through, the difficulties that they may face is that they have kind of gone through a journey in terms of their careers. They've landed themselves with quite successful placements, maybe in the city, and then all of this rocks up, and that can have ramifications on their ability to remain in the UK. It can have ramifications on whether their employers want to renew their status, because it's a knock-on effect in terms of your performance, your delivery. And there's a lot of pressure. But also what I see is, for example, we have cases where someone might have issued in India under the Hindu Marriage Act, and will be seeking to put pressure on the family back home and also here. Or they will be invoking the dowry laws back home, and they are threatening to take the family back home to court, and court there is very different. It's very abusive as well as a process, and they can often use that as a threat to tell the spouses here that you need to sort yourself out. So it's, I would say there are challenges on both fronts, but they're different, and having a lawyer that has got experience in dealing with both sets of difficulties is what matters.
Okay. And what sort of help is available here for the migrant spouses, basically, in terms of financial support or residency or even child custody? What sort of support is available for them?
Do you mean from the government?
Yeah.
So that very much depends on everyone's unique situation.
Okay.
But of course, you are able to reach out, and this depends on your status within the UK, but you can reach out in the normal way to the social system network in the UK to see what support might be available. Some people from lower earning backgrounds might, for example, qualify for legal aid. If you've had a situation of abusive behaviour or domestic abuse, they might be able to qualify on those fronts. And that might assist them in the legal process as well.
And is it normal, like is it a typical process that the lawyers um, do provide help and guidance to um, the domestic abuse person, like in such situations? Do you guide them, like where to reach out to, where is the right support, where's the right help?
So the way it works, Mina, if someone calls me up
Yeah.
and says, "Look, I was beaten, or I was abused verbally,
Yeah.
or I have gone through difficulty," it's actually my job to work out what protection they need,
Hmm.
how I get them that protection, where they should be living, what their interim housing looks like. So immediately,
Okay.
what should happen,
Yeah.
what should happen in respect to the children. Do I
Yeah.
need to be thinking about applications for their safety?
Hmm.
And what do the longer term arrangements look like? So we essentially will take on a case, and we will dissect every aspect of what is going
Okay.
on for that person,
Yeah.
and then work with them on solutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what does UK law have for the what's the law for the division of the property when the divorces happen? What's the law there?
So that's quite a broad question.
Okay.
Again, it depends on the facts of the case. You have millionaires divorcing, you have people with no assets divorcing.
Yeah.
Their financial outcomes will be extremely different. The governing statute is something called the Matrimonial Causes Act. And what that does is dictate several factors that the court needs to take into account when looking at the division of finances within any divorce. And then we also lean on statute. So, every time someone comes to me
Yeah.
and says, "Look, Naheed, what might I qualify for in respect of a financial provision?" I would then again need to dissect and look at the facts, look at what's happened, look at the history. How long is the marriage? Are there children? What are their needs? What is their income? What is the disparity of income between one spouse and the other? Because you might have one that's the higher earner.
Yeah.
You might have someone who stayed at home taking care of the children. You might have people on equal footing when it comes to income. You might have people with significant pension provision. You might have inherited wealth. You could have properties overseas. You could be in rental accommodation. So all of these are then examined and considered carefully by us. When you've done the job for as long as I have, you develop something called an intuition inside you.
Okay.
So you could give me any set of facts, and I could pretty much tell you how a judge would perceive that.
Okay.
And what we should be doing, and where we should be targeting and positioning ourselves to get the desired outcome.
Okay. Okay. And just to ask you as an example, let's say if there's a couple who have come from, let's say, India, right? They both are working here, and they've got a house on a mortgage, probably on both of their names. They've got a child, and they're going for a divorce. Just briefly, can you tell what would be
I
their
would
situation?
need to know how long have they been married for.
Okay.
What is the age of the spouse? How much do they each earn? What assets are involved?
Okay.
And it's only when you get all of that information that you can then, because if someone is earning 150k, and the other spouse is on 30k, there's a massive significant disparity there. In that kind of situation, one of the biggest factors that might need to be considered is whether there should be spousal maintenance for the lower earning spouse.
Okay.
How what the objective of the courts and the judges is to try and upon the end of a marriage, try and put people on an equal footing as much as they possibly can. Okay, so this concept that people come to, where they might say, do we split everything 50-50? Is that kind of the law? That's not the law. It's looking at how can I put two people on equal footing, even if it's for a period of a few years, to allow for an adjustment until they're able to reconsider their options and remake a life for themselves.
Okay. And what happens when the extended family assets are involved, like a shared home where, I don't know, you're living with your parents, your probably brother, his wife, kids? Then what happens there?
Mina, that's a really, really good
Tricky.
question, because particularly in South Asian families,
That's
this
the
happens
case.
a lot.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. So I see a lot of this where you will have a third person who has a monetary involvement within the assets that belong to husband and wife.
Yeah.
So in those types of situations, say for example, you had exactly that, a family living together and the parents are living with them. Okay, they're going through a difficult time. They're going through a divorce. The house might be in the husband's sole name. The mother and father may have given the husband £100,000 when he purchased the home, with the intention that they will continue to live there with him and his children and wife. So in those types of situations, the first thing the court's got to do is look at the preliminary problem. And the preliminary problem is this: if someone outside of that marriage has injected sums into the marriage, the court has got to substantiate, number one, were those funds money given to the spouses as a gift, or was it a loan? And if it was a loan, what were the terms of the loan? Even if it wasn't written objectively, what was the intention of those parents? Were they thinking that we're going to have a lifetime interest in this property and we're going to be allowed to live here, and that money was effectively their retirement pot, that they didn't expect to be swallowed up into a divorce, but they were expecting that that would give them an interest, or that the money would be returned if the house was ever sold, so that they can rehouse themselves? So in those types of situations, the parents are invited to intervene into the divorce, and then the parents might have their own legal representation, and they will make applications to become part of the husband and wife's divorce. So it's a very complicated area of law, which we do a lot of, just simply because of the nature of South Asian families and the setup.
And to young couples, what would you advise them to, how can they secure their financials before marriage, like stuff like prenuptial agreements? Do you recommend them?
So I think there's probably layers to that question. I think the first thing I encourage people to do is talk openly about money. In excess of 70% of the population is now, I'm afraid, heading towards separation or divorce. So whereas this was something that might happen, there is every likelihood, I'm afraid, that your marriage could end up now in a situation that carries you through to a divorce. And so you've got to be thinking about these things and having these conversations right at the outset. And the reason that's really important is because it will give you a sense of whether finances are important to that person and in which way they are important, and whether you're able to have those meaningful conversations within your marriage to try and plan what should happen in any event. Unfortunately, we don't do that. Because when you enter into a relationship, you don't want to be talking about what's going to happen in respect to the bills, who's going to pay for them. There's we fall into expectations and roles in terms of who takes responsibility for money. So these are things that should be considered. In respect of your question about prenuptial agreements, I would definitely encourage them, because one, it gives you the ability to have the dialogue. It also gives you the ability to have transparency. So if someone else had injected money, or you have commitments to extended family members, you can talk about those, and you can talk about what should happen on the in respect of the finances upon divorce. In reality, my experience is that it doesn't happen. Prenups are not taken up by people,
Okay.
and they should be. And what we're advising people that are maybe the parents of children that might be considering marriage is for them to almost make it a precondition within their will or any inheritance that a prenup should be required, because
Yeah.
they will be dragged into potential litigation if they haven't ring fenced those assets.
Yeah. Yeah, true. No, I agree. I think it should be common. And a lot of people from our background, like from India, Pakistan, it's just a society and the culture we're brought up in. Like, we don't want to talk about these things, and it's still taken as a taboo, especially divorce is a great taboo still. But yeah, I think youngsters these days, I mean, they're adults, and when they're getting married, they are adults, so they should be able to have these conversations. I personally don't think parents should get involved here, but I mean, it's a personal choice. Everyone has a different family,
Well,
different
I
setup.
think the only, if I was getting my daughter married and I was going to hand her down a substantial sum of money, I would want to be sure that that money is going to be there for the future of my child.
Yeah.
If I've worked my entire career to put my children in a advantaged position,
Yeah.
I want to be sure as a parent that that money is going to be used to safeguard their
Yeah,
interest
true.
and not be swallowed up, potentially 50% of it, by
Yeah.
someone else who comes along and says, well, I'd like a bit of that, thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
So, it is something, I mean, I would say that at the very least, what you can do is get advice from any family lawyer and say, look, these are my set of facts. This is what we're thinking of doing as a family. Could this jeopardize or impact our child in
Yeah.
the future? And that way you're well informed and you can take those decisions, but also you then know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
The number of people when they're about to go through a divorce and they say, oh, Naheed, shall I just transfer the money to my brother, or shall I transfer the house to my sister, or shall I do this? No. If you do anything on the onset of the breakdown of a marriage, that is heightened by the court, and it's looked as if you are deliberately dissipating assets to put them beyond the reach of the court. So it can actually impact you significantly and negatively.
Okay.
Unless these things are thought about well in advance, when things are good, not when sort of the marriage is on the rocks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And do you see greed playing a role in divorce settlements? Do you see that often?
I think greed can be interpreted differently.
Okay.
The court looks at needs, and that's the interpretation. So I think more than greed as well, it's about egos. It's about, I have given my life into this institution.
Yeah.
I have given all of my youth. I have given you children.
Yeah.
I have done everything possible. I shouldn't now feel as if I've been hard done by.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to continue to give my children the same lifestyle as I did, before or whilst we were married. So it's it's a mixture, it's a concoction of emotions, and those emotions fluctuate. Sometimes I have to say to a client, look, I know you're frustrated. I'm going to put the phone down now and I'm going to call you back in 10 minutes. And then what we're going to try and do is have a sensible conversation about how we're going to deal with this. Because the biggest part of family law that people forget is, if you and I are talking about something, we can have a sensible conversation. You might have a different viewpoint. I've got a different viewpoint. But we can agree to differ, or we can try and find a common ground. If I don't like you and you've hurt me, I might not be able to see past my feelings or the hurt to even hear what you are saying to me. And then, unfortunately, what happens is when you instruct lawyers, sometimes the hate is heightened because you've got letters passing. I might have issued into court. There might be all sorts of things. I might be talking about jewelry that was really important to you.
Yeah.
That you think, well, why is he even asking me about my jewelry? It could be something small that the lawyers or the courts are not focused on, but really matter to you.
Yeah, true.
And that might be the trigger that escalates into further litigation or further difficulties.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's just greed. I think it's a combination of factors.
Yeah. Tell me about how does the UK legal system determines the custody rights or the access rights after the divorce?
So again, that's a very broad question.
I mean, sorry,
but
I'm cutting you off, but the perception is that the child always goes to the mother. The children always go to the mother. Is that the case?
So firstly, I just want to correct. There's no such thing as child custody in the
Okay.
UK. We don't use those terms. They were abolished years ago.
Okay.
And the reason for that is the courts don't like to assert a certain right or ownership over a child. Okay, so if I say I've got custody of my child, that implies that the child is mine. It's my right to do what I like with. I've got custody of something. That means it's my ownership. The court has changed the entire statute and literature around it to call it child arrangements.
Okay.
So we arrange a set of routines for that child to ensure that both parents, as much as possible, are going to be involved in this child's life.
Yeah.
So yeah, we call it child arrangements. So when you separate, one of the big aspects that we talk to parents about is, look, you can agree with your spouse whatever arrangements you like in respect of your children. And I always say, without doubt, to all of my clients, you want to keep me away from that. Okay? Keep the lawyers well away from any arrangements you want in respect of your children. What you want to do is work with your spouse over the course of a number of months, weeks, whatever it takes, to see what arrangements might work for your children.
Yeah.
You've got the PhD in respect to your children. I don't know them. You know them from birth. You know their likes, dislikes. You know their relationship with the other parent. The point at which we get involved is where there is areas of risk or safeguarding or harm in respect of that child.
Okay.
And one parent is saying to me, no, Naheed, I can't have the other parent, for example, spending time with them or spending significant time with them because I am worried that this is the impact this is going to have on my child.
Yeah.
Or the other parent has never been around to take care of this child. I've always done the school runs. I've always done the nappies. I've done the feeding. They were always just scrolling on their phone. In moments of stress, they can't deal with the child having a tantrum.
Yeah.
I've got to take control over this situation. I've got to be sure that the child is protected. So in those types of situations, you would then involve a lawyer. And just going on to your third question about whether the children end up with the mother, that's not correct at all.
Okay.
So I have a significant male clientele. We've secured so many orders where we've retained residency or something called a live with order in respect of the father.
Okay.
And again, it very much depends on the age of the child, what is going on. The reason you can't generalize in this advice is just like everyone's home. If you went round knocking on the street and you knocked, every time someone opened the door, you would see something different.
Something different, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same with these cases. And the one thing I do want to say, Mina, is what is really dangerous at the moment is where people are Googling or putting into ChatGPT or putting into the internet, I have a child, he is 6, this is what happened, what's the outcome? This is wrong. it's you cannot compare your child who is 6 to another 6-year-old.
You cannot generalize it. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
and just like your marriage and your home family life is very different, each case that we have is decided bespokely on the merits of the case, and every fact is different. You could have had a situation. I've got a case at the moment where the father picked up a chair and smashed this in front of the child. Okay. Now, as a consequence of that, this child has unfortunately taken that event, and it's mentally impacted them. Okay, so emotionally, this child is not ready to now see his father or spend significant time with his father because he is unable to see past what had happened.
Yeah.
I've got other children who have seen far grave incidences of violence or disturbing behavior,
Yeah.
but they have not internalized this. They don't look at it in the same way. So you can't compare those two 6-year-olds in the same way because they are different children and they've processed it differently. That 6-year-old who saw the chair, who's internalized it, might need 2 years of work before he's in a position of confidence where he's able to spend time with his father. So again, when it comes to anything to do with child arrangements, you have to get advice and make sure that you understand the remit of what you're looking at. But that probably needs to happen, before you even issue your divorce. So that as I said, I started off by saying people don't necessarily understand that, what does life look like without my children? Because that could be a real consequence of what you might be looking at if you issue a divorce. So these things have to be thought out extremely carefully, right at the outset before any decision is taken on anything.
Yeah. And do you see cases of separation as well? Like, what are the consequences that parents face when they're co-parenting, when they're having a separation? Not entirely divorce, but just like separation.
A lot of people do trial separate. I do think that sometimes it's good because it gives you a window of what might a life look like. Also, I've had cases where after a bout of separation, what the parties have realized is that, look, maybe there is a mechanism of now us working on this relationship for the sake of the children. They realize that they don't want a situation where the children are moving between two homes. They might equally both say, look, if we still feel like this in 4 years' time, let's do it then. Right now it's too premature to put these children in that situation. And you might have a regulation of how life in the home is managed. So the only thing I would say with a longer term separation is we all change. So there will be significant changes in your life as you travel through time naturally. And what I've seen in situations where people have been separated for a while is, to begin with, you've got two people in two homes, they're separated, life's all going nicely, they're helping each other. And then, say, for example, the lady might meet a man, someone else then comes into the picture. And it changes the dynamics of the expectations that you each had, the unsaid expectations that you each had in respect of what the separation should look like. And then there's difficulties, because I might have the dad calling me and saying, well, I've now dropped the kids and there's a man there and I'm not happy about this. And what does this all mean? And so I always say to clients, short-term separations to kind of understand what you all want is sensible, but longer-term separations where there might be significant changes in wealth, your employment, future partners, those are all extremely tricky issues, and it can often make the divorce even more difficult because there's no incentive to almost sort things out quickly because you've been separated, you've kind of almost lost the relationship that was. And sometimes also loss of guilt, because sometimes if you have wronged the other person, you might, on the onset of divorce, might want to put things right for them. And give them a good financial settlement on the basis that you've wronged them,
Yeah.
over time and over a longer period of separation, that doesn't exist.
Okay. And have you ever seen long child custody battles, like for years and years as it goes on? What do you think is the alternative route to resolve that quickly?
So Mina, I practice a lot in complex children work.
Okay.
So I've been involved in some of the most difficult cases in the country, where you might have a case involving children for in excess of 4 years, where you have instances where the child is has been alienated by the other parent, and what that means is where one child has objectively refused to have any contact with the other parent, but there is no fundamental reason as to why they should refuse. So when the parents were together, the parent had a flourishing and positive relationship with this child. Upon separation, all of a sudden, this child doesn't want to know the parent. And that's an extremely complex area where you might have to involve significant professionals. You might need psychological reports. You might need to go through behavioral therapy. I've got children coming through now who have neurodiversity issues. And so having a psychologist or professional to work with them is not as easy as it sounds. You've got to have someone who has the skill set of managing the situation and trying to work with the child to see why the rejection happens.
Yeah.
Now, my client might say to me, the rejection is happening because the other parent has infiltrated the mind of the child and manipulated them to think that the other parent is bad. But all of those issues, unfortunately, can take years to resolve. And we do have cases that have gone on for years, and they are horrendous, and it's awful for every single person involved, because in terms of the practitioners, the judges, we do everything possible to make sure that we can contain an issue quicker. And nowadays we enter into alternative methods of dispute. So we might say, look, let's encourage a round table meeting where we encourage their lawyers to visit us, and see if we can work out a way forward. But where you have a safeguarding or a risk issue in respect of children, you can't mediate in that way. You've got to move the case forward through the court. And also, if someone is deliberately obstructing contact, the only way I can move this case forward is by a judge saying, no, that's what's been ordered and that's what's happening. And I might have to wait 6 months before I get to that court date. And in that 6 months, lots of other things have happened. So, yeah, none of this is easy. In any case, the first consideration and one of the paramount considerations for the judiciary is making sure that where possible, we are containing and working out solutions for children quicker. But the reality of it is the number of cases going through the family court right now in respect of child arrangements has meant that cases have been pushed back. So if I made an application today for a trial, I won't get heard until a year. Yeah, so it's some of it is not within our control, or the control of the parents. The court system is a public run system like the NHS, and it is bursting with problems. It does not have resources available for people, and there are significant difficulties.
What is the law, or like, I'm sure they can do this, but if there's a separation or a divorce going on and a child is living with, let's say, parent one, can they take the child on a holiday without informing parent two? I mean, I think they can't, but if they do, what are the consequences that they would have to deal with?
Again, it's a really good question because it happens.
It happens, yeah.
The first thing you have to establish when you're a parent of a child is, do I have something called parental responsibility? Okay, a mother has parental responsibility by virtue of the fact that she gave birth to the child. And so parental responsibility is acquired, and we can identify that.
Yeah.
With fathers, they either have to be on the birth certificate, or they have had been married to the mother at the time of the birth.
Okay.
So imagine a situation where a father has a child, they weren't named on the birth certificate, and they weren't married to mum. They don't automatically have parental responsibility, and you have to acquire it either by asking the other parent or going to court. So once you've established parental responsibility, then what you've got to do is understand that have you got any orders in your favour in respect of that child? So if I had an order in respect of my children, something called a live with order, I could then take my child out for up to 28 days without consent of another person.
Okay.
But most people don't have those.
Okay.
And in those types of situations, that's where quite often we have to make an application to the court saying, there was a 2-week holiday booked in October to Florida. Dad is unreasonably withholding consent. We need consent. We need this to be listed. The court lists it, and we acquire the consent, allowing the people to travel, the mother to travel with the child.
Yeah.
The better way of dealing with that issue is you've got to understand is, the shoe might be on the other foot tomorrow. You've got to both kind of give each other the benefit of allowing travel to happen, confirming dates, venues, contact information, and those types of agreements can be arranged. But I see this a lot where, either there's been a refusal or the other party doesn't allow the other person to go. But usually it might be because there's a risk of safeguarding. I have a lot of people, for example, who want to, on the onset of divorce, take their children back to India on a holiday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those types of issues do require robust and quick action from lawyers to think, okay, what the hell is actually going on here?
Yeah. How common is domestic violence a reason for a divorce? How common do you see it in your cases?
It's really sad, actually, because I see it a lot.
A lot.
And it's becoming, I don't know if it's becoming an increasing problem, but even in people of significant wealth, where you've got women who are in extremely high earning positions. They might be CEOs of companies. They might be running their own company. They might be affiliated, with, as a consultant, or, significant women in their own standing. And oddly, they've not raised the issue of abuse for years and years and years. And when they come to me and I'm kind of listening to this, it's a catalogue, Mina, of, 2008 this happened, then 2012 this happened, then I had my child, then this happened. And you're listening to this and you literally have to kind of squeeze yourself thinking, oh my gosh, you have been through years of abusive behaviour. You've put up with it and done nothing effectively. Domestic abuse impacts then the child arrangement. So if you told me, look, this is what's happened to me, I would then have to say to you, look, have you considered whether, given the abuse you've suffered, whether the children are now safe in the other parent's care? Equally, I don't want to make this a sexist remark or statement. I have an increasing level of, or number of males, fathers, who have been abused physically, emotionally, and actually, again, they've never sometimes told anyone. They might be in my office, and the first person they've ever told that, she slapped me, she hit me, she bit me, I didn't know what to do. And when you're looking at gathering evidence of that, there is none. There is none, because men don't tend to talk about this. They don't want to tell their friend, I just got hit by my missus. That's not a conversation.
But why do you think it's that if a woman says that she was abused, that's more believable, but if a man says it's hard to believe.
I think it's just the sexist roles that we have, and the systems of, look, the prejudices are that a man of the house is strong and they're able to, and men or women biologically are designed differently. So the issue also is one of harm. So men are less likely to get assistance, support, or help. Also, a lot of the males I deal with, they say, well, it's not like I could call the police. There's a real barrier there. I don't think they feel that anyone will believe them. I don't think they feel that they can show that vulnerability in the same way that a woman can show. And that's because of the world we live in, how men and women are portrayed in terms of our gender roles and the expectations that we each have.
And what legal protections does abuse victims have? Like,
so you, through the family courts, you can get some really robust injunctions very quickly. So if you came to me and you had been abused, or you called me, I could within 24 hours secure orders to make sure that someone can't come near you, they can't harm you, they can't come to your house or come back to the house. Again, it depends on what we call the risk of harm. So you have to substantiate a test. So I would go through lots of information with you to see if I can substantiate it and convince myself. And then if I was convinced, I would then make the applications. But I do a lot of that sort of work. So we would sift out whether we think there's a likelihood. But the protection, if merited, can be obtained very quickly. That's both for men and women.
Okay. And what happens when a couple is living together and then someone reports that they've been abused? Then what happens, because they're living in the same property?
So then you would acquire something called an occupation order, seeking to remove the other person from the home.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, those are extremely complicated orders and onerous orders to acquire, because you're effectively diminishing someone of their human right. You are removing them from their home. You've got to convince a judge that this is the right order to acquire, and in the absence of acquiring that order, that there's a real risk of harm to this person. That isn't always easy. So again, it's about getting careful advice around what has happened and also the timing of when that should happen. Because if I said to you, right, you've been abused, an incident has happened, and you went home and say, right, I'm going to get a lawyer involved, it might be that you get abused even more. So sometimes these applications have to be made without informing the other person, and acquiring the order, serving the orders where they might be served and given, for example, 8 hours to leave. It's a very, very extremely quick process, but you have to effectively get all your ducks in a row and make sure everything is lined up.
Yeah. And what do you think about how the movies and the dramas, how do they reflect the abuse and divorce? What do you have to say about that?
I think family law and this area is dramatized quite a bit. I don't think anyone accurately reflects what happens in the family court here. But it's a closed court. People don't really know what goes on unless you go through the process. It's difficult. I've seen series on Netflix, and I'm thinking, no, that doesn't happen. So it is interesting about the media's perception, but they're making TV. They've got to make it interesting. Having said that, there's not an hour of my day that is not sparked with adrenaline because something has happened on a case. Not, the amount of difficulties we see, the amount of challenges, the amount of litigation we do is significant. So it is a Netflix series every single day.
I remember there was a movie a few years back, can't remember the name, but Aishwarya Rai was playing the lead, and she was the domestic victim in the movie. I can't really remember the name.
Oh, I'm not sure.
So she was abused really bad in the movie, and she keeps taking the abuse for years and years and years.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
eventually,
She kills him?
yeah, she
Yeah.
kills him.
So that's actually based on
A
a
true
real
story,
case.
yeah, real case, yeah.
And it's a criminal case. But that was around the law of what we call provocation.
Yeah.
So when someone has, for years and years and years and years, tormented you,
Yeah.
that one day that equates to you taking their life because
Yeah.
you see no other way forward.
Yeah.
You use the defense of provocation in this country to say I was provoked to do that. But
Yeah.
that was probably quite a good reflection of what happened in that case.
Yeah.
And what was going on.
And we also saw, like, when I was doing some research, I read a lot of things, like, people said that, why was she taking the abuse for that many years? And then I see these other movies, like, the recent movie, Thappad, Taapsee Pannu from Bollywood.
Yeah.
She files a divorce with her husband because he slapped her once. So I just kind of get confused in these two scenarios. Like, one place people are saying, why would you take divorce for, like, abuse for so many years?
Yeah.
And they would just say that that's not right. She should have taken, a step at the first time whenever she faced the abuse. But on the other hand, people say that, oh, it's just one slap. She could have worked it out. She could have just. So I'm kind of confused. Like, what should a person do in that situation?
I think, Mina, a lot of it is got to do with maybe your childhood. What you saw when you were growing up.
Yeah.
Is that one thappad enough for you to stand up and say, how, I've never seen that in my life?
Yeah.
Or were you in a situation where actually it might not have been physical abuse, but maybe you had been emotionally abused through your life, where you were learnt to understand that it's okay to be abused through your childhood. And it's funny because when I'm going through statements with clients and I'm looking at what happened previously, it tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about, which sibling they were, what was going on at home, why they may accept abuse as opposed to someone who would say no. No, I mean, no abuse should be accepted. And I think generally what I've seen is once you start having what we call patterns of abuse and behavior, they only escalate one stage further each time. So, first it's a push, then, it's a strong hand, then it might turn into a slap, then it might turn into, something more significant. And there can be escalations in this, which is why at the very outset, if I was to say to anyone who's been a victim, is you've got to really think about, if you've gone through abuse and you think it's quite low level, what steps have you taken to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Are you prepared to have intervention in your relationship to look at what is causing this? So if your other half has anger management issues, have they worked on those? What therapeutic involvement do you think might help you to ensure that you don't have a situation of that nature again? So, and actually, people don't do that.
Yeah.
What they hope for is things will get better.
Yeah, it just won't happen.
This will
again.
go away.
Yeah.
And it only escalates.
Yeah.
So, but it's difficult because when you're in the epicenter of a situation like that, it's extremely difficult to look objectively. I think what people are beginning to do is reach out to people, talk about the abuse. It's becoming less shameful to say, look, this is what's happening in my marriage. I need help. And I think women are better at it. They're better at saying, look, have you talked to the police? Have you told so-and-so? Have you told your parents you need to get out? You need to do this? But actually, even though women are better at vocalizing, they carry on staying in situations which are untenable, and that's often because there's children involved and they think that staying is better. You've got to understand what happens to children who see abusive relationships over the course of a period of time. If that cycle is not broken, undoubtedly those children will have real difficulties when they're in their adult relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've got to ask yourself, do I want to risk my child living a life like I have in the effort that I'm protecting them, I'm trying to keep everything together, but actually in hindsight what I've done is shown them that abuse is fine to be accepted.
And how often do you see false allegations of abuse in divorce cases?
Unfortunately, a lot. Yeah, they're some of the saddest cases I deal with, where one party, say for example it's the husband, says, you know, I've never touched her though, I've never done any of this. You know, and unfortunately a lot of people do use false accusations and false allegations to make a situation where the father is then removed from the children's lives.
Access, yeah.
So it's not just an allegation, it can have a tantamount impact on child arrangements in the future and the contact that father might have with their children. And it's awful because I don't feel, as a practitioner in this area, I don't feel that there are significant repercussions for people who make such allegations. You know, if the allegation has been found to not be correct, what are the ramifications?
Yeah. So what does court do then in that case?
Well, the issue the courts have is the judiciary is required to look at whether there is a possibility of that happening, and that has to be that finding has to be made on the facts before the court or the judge. Just because they haven't found it doesn't mean it didn't happen, and so the ramifications don't exist. Okay. What you can sometimes do is you can record on the face of the order that, you know, that allegation wasn't found, and the court or social workers can implicate from that there seems to be a pattern of one party making up stuff that is false. But some of that takes, again, years for you to look at from afar and think, okay, now I can see exactly what's gone on here. But, you know, there's no immediate impact to say, okay, you've made a false allegation, you've not been able to prove it, and now, for example, the impact of that is that you're going to have a cost order against you. That's what I think should happen. If you forced me to employ lawyers, go to court, then you need to be paying my legal fees if I've established that that fact isn't found. Because I think if more judges did that, then less people would be inclined, knowing that there's a financial consequence or risk. But that doesn't really happen in practice.
And how often do you see cases where men are abused in a marriage, but they find it difficult to prove it? Have you had like men clients?
Yeah, many clients who are in that situation. The reason they find it extremely difficult to prove is often they've never reached out to anyone. You know, they don't take, for example, a picture of the abusing. They've not recorded what happened. They've not told anyone. And in order to substantiate abuse, you do have to demonstrate some evidence. But we have had cases where, despite having no evidence, we've still been able to establish it.
So if you have to give out 3 reasons that you see for divorce today compared to 20-25 years back, what would you give those 3 reasons, which are like the top reasons that you see in today's time are the reasons for divorce?
I think one of the most fundamental reasons is there has been a significant shift in this country in terms of women earning and having their own financial pot. And so where you might have had a financial reliance on one party, now you've got maybe people with an equal quantum where on the onset of difficulties they might feel that, well, I don't need you, what are you bringing to my table? I can walk away and still make provision for myself on a financial basis.
Hmm.
So that's a significant reason that I think, and I think in back home still leads people to stay in highly conflicted situations, because they can make provision. I think the second big reason is the manner in which this entire world is changing. We have become less attention focused. We constantly need, our attention spike to be engaged, and that's because of social media. That's because of the era of what we live in, and unfortunately, for a lot of people, if the marriage isn't working out, well, there's 10 alternatives. I can sit on my phone and I can get those feelings of excitement or companionship, or feeling better about myself just staying in the same room that I was anyway. I don't need to go outside and look for someone. It's become so available. And the other thing is, I think unsaid expectations. We have significant expectations now of marriage, and I always look at the institution and I think, how is it possible that one person can meet your entire needs? Your emotional need, your financial need, your spiritual need. One person can't fulfill you as a whole. It's not possible. Yet we lay the responsibility solely on that one person. So the expectations that we have in relationships are at a level which I think are just not manageable. How can I possibly be the best cook, the best homemaker, the best mother, the best business owner, the most financially viable person in the room? Our expectations are not just, I want a person to make home with. It's an expectation on so many other levels. For example, women, we've moved away from a situation where we're now independent, for example.
Yeah.
But you're still coming home and cleaning the home and taking care of the children.
True.
So you've now got 3 jobs as opposed to 1, which was caring for the children. So there are massive problems in the way that we are managing families now that are going to have ramifications. A lot of the issues I see with young families, you do have this woman, she's going out to work, she's coming home stressed out. She needs to then make dinner. She needs to pick the children up. She needs to make home still nice. She needs to then entertain. She needs to make sure she's still looking good. It's levels of expectations that I think have made the institution extremely difficult.
Why do you think some marriages work and some fail? What's the difference that you think?
I honestly think it's, are you prepared to wake up every day and think, I'm going to put work into this? Because I don't buy anyone convincing me that one marriage is easy and the other one's not easy. I think some people are better at putting in the work, and some people, for whatever reason, feel that they either don't want to or they can't, or that there's other factors like abuse that don't allow them to. Okay, but if we're just looking at very platonic relationships where the abuse doesn't exist and people have fallen out of love, it's usually because you are not finding new ways to work on it. Just like a career or a job, you've got to wake up and want to put that work in every single day, and some days it's not going to be easy. And also, not airing how you're feeling creates, so good, bad or ugly, I feel you should tell the other person what you're thinking and how you're feeling. Your feelings might change. So sometimes I might be feeling really unhappy about a situation. Over time I might learn to accept it. But if I haven't told you how I feel about it, I'm going to presume you're going to know, and that's going to create over time resentment.
True.
Yeah.
So communication is really important here.
Yeah. But also, it's not just communication, but have you heard what I've said? Do I hear what you said? I can talk, but have you heard me and have I heard you? I have so many people. I told her I didn't want to do this. I told him I didn't. Yeah, but that's not communication. That's you saying what you want, she saying what she wants. But you haven't thought, you know, looking at the problem as a problem that we both have, as opposed to, well, that's something you want or something I want.
Yeah.
If we looked at situations in a marriage as, well, this is our collective issue, how are we going to resolve this? As opposed to, well, you've got a drinking problem and you need to sort this out. No, this is a problem within our home. How can we try and work towards this? But instead, what we're doing is you kind of look at each other as if you're on different sides, as opposed to being on one team, and you focus on the problem as being one person's, as opposed to something that's a collective issue.
Yeah, true. And tell me, how often do you see sexual compatibility an issue and a reason for divorce, like in young couples especially?
I think, unfortunately, by the time the cases come to me,
Yeah.
The couples have been living separately in separate rooms for a long time.
Okay.
When these issues arrive, no intervention happens, and again, they fall into patterns of behaviour. It's funny. I was talking to a lady last week who was telling me, we don't even sit on the same sofa anymore. So, sexual compatibility is at one end of the spectrum. You would expect to be living in the same house, and at least, you touch there, you hug,
Yeah.
there's delivery in the way you talk to each other through body language. And unfortunately, when bitterness creeps up, those things start shutting down. But that kind of happens well ahead of, by the time there's a deterioration where someone might involve a lawyer and say, look, it's over.
And I feel like in modern marriages, social media plays a big role, right? People, go on holidays, young couples, right? And they post pictures on Instagram, and other people see and they think, this is amazing, we need to do it. But obviously, they need to understand every couple is different.
Yeah.
They have different circumstances, right? Obviously, it's not 100% that your partner can provide you the same lifestyle what someone else is having. So when people build expectations from a relationship, I feel that is also a problem these days in the marriages.
Yeah, I think that's
Do you see
really
that?
accurate, Mina. Yeah, unfortunately. I know that I have a phone call from the very same people who are posting these pictures telling me something completely different. And it's really funny, when I put off a call, I look at their WhatsApp image and it's a rosy picture of a family. I think our social media image is in direct contradiction often to what is going on in the home. And unfortunately, all of that doesn't help. What I would say to people is, don't look at their facade on social media and think that there's no issues there, or look at this beautiful image, look at this beautiful couple, look at everything that they're doing. None of that is real. It's designed to show a nice image, right? You're not going to put up a picture of yourself where you've just woken out of bed. It's all filtered, it's all designed, it all looks glamorous. In reality, that's not something you want to compare your life to, and that's not something that is real.
Do you see if there's a difference between the cases that you see for divorce? Do you ever ask your clients, was it a love marriage? Was it an arranged marriage? Does that make a difference? Or do you think which one in today's time is more successful?
So yeah, we do. We always ask them how they met.
Okay.
But no, I don't think there's any direct correlation.
Okay.
I think I've seen lots of marriages where they've been arranged and it's fallen apart.
Yeah.
There's been expectations of the family, there's been expectations of other people, but equally, people have met through work, university, friends, and it's fallen apart. What I have seen recently, at the moment, I've got about 4 cases where the marriage hasn't even lasted a year.
Okay.
And they have decided to go their separate ways and divorce. And that's quite unfortunate.
Wow.
And it just tells you that the tolerance just isn't there anymore.
I mean, I feel like even if it's a love marriage, you still need to live with the person for a certain period of time to build that compatibility as a husband and wife, because that's completely different
To the boyfriend and girlfriend
yeah
position.
yeah so you need to give yourself some time. I think a year is
But
just
what
a quick
happens
decision.
is in that year I've collected problems.
Okay.
And I'm going to now spend the next 3 years focusing on that year of problems without realizing that that could have been an adjustment period. I live very differently to how you live your life. We've come together in a home. Of course, there's going to be things that irritate me and irritate you. Do I take those on board and say, well, that's a representation of you because you insist that I don't know, put the bread in the fridge as opposed to leaving it out? It's often trivial things. But often, I think it's about how you've made the other person feel through that process.
Yeah.
So are you undermining the decisions they take? Have you taken time to think about what is important to them? Have you thought about how they lived for the last 25, 40 years? Which is why I also have a whole heap of people marrying after 40, where your behaviours are quite ingrained and entrenched, and changing those in terms of how you now live can be quite challenging.
Difficult, yeah. True. And do you see dowry still a culture around in our society, and is that a reason still for divorce?
It's not a reason for divorce, but it can become a problem.
Okay.
And it can be an issue that comes up in divorces. I see a lot of cases where someone might want, for example, gold that was given back or returned, and these become contentious issues as part of the finances.
Okay.
So yeah, they're live issues that do come up and can create difficulties.
Yeah.
And also, I think can create a lot of mistrust between the couple and the families, where someone might have left a home and taken, I don't know, £20,000 worth of jewelry with them.
Okay. What we spoke briefly earlier with living with families and parents and I don't know other siblings. So how does that affect a marriage and a new married couple? How does that affect, like, if they're living independently just in their own space, or they're living with a joint family? How does family impacts and, like, their marriage? Because obviously if you're living with your family, your mom would say something, or dad would say something, like you said, sister or brother would say something, so they have impact on your daily life decisions. How does that affect your marriage?
So again, because there is the cost of living crisis, because people find it difficult to just buy a property and move out, we're seeing a lot of this, a lot of it, where couples decide, okay, we'll just stay with mum and dad for a couple of years. By the time you know it, they've got children. And often the bitterness in these relationships is at a level where you just think this is not going to survive. And it's really unfortunate because really there's no real issue between the spouses. A lot of these issues could be eradicated if, for example, they had moved out earlier. But often what I see is by the time they then agree that that's a real issue and there's an agreement or financial ability to move, so much has been said and done that recovering that position often becomes difficult, because then the parents might think that the other spouse has deliberately convinced the husband to move out, and he's now left them all. And we have a lot of responsibility, I think, in society to not create emotional difficulty for people, but we are astoundingly brilliant at creating it. We can really create emotional blackmail. Just because someone has decided, or your child has decided, to leave your home and create a life for them, why are you placing a victim badge on yourself and telling the whole world how life is difficult for you?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's not your children are given to you as a trust from God. You're there to protect, provide, and allow them to live successful lives. They weren't meant to come into the planet Earth to become there to live with you and care for you. Not that they shouldn't, but that doesn't mean they have to do that living within the confines of your home, your
Yeah.
routine, and have their spouses live in the same way, and their children. You've got to allow your children to fly the nest.
Yeah.
And I've never quite understood why people create those difficulties when you could actually think, okay, let me look at the personalities involved here. Can I live with my child and his spouse? And can I look at myself fairly and think, well, if this is going to create difficulty, why not assist them in other ways, for example, financially, in helping them maybe buy something or rent somewhere, as opposed to creating a situation which often is designed to fail.
Yeah. And I just feel like if you're considering marrying someone, um, it's also best practice to actually see how the parents are. Because obviously, you're not just marrying one person, you're
Marrying the
marrying a
family,
family,
yeah,
right? So you need to get the right understanding whether you're compatible with the family and the values they have. Because obviously, if you think something, if your values are completely different than probably his parents, right, or her parents, I think it's the time that you need to think about it whether you want to go ahead with it. Because obviously, if let's say your partner's parents want to be more involved in your married life, right, and you don't want that, that could be a problem.
yeah.
So it's best that you decide whether you want to go ahead with it and then face those issues, or if you're saying this is not for me, it's better to actually just take a step back and not go ahead with it, because obviously you're going to ruin your life, you're going to ruin someone else's life as well, instead of
Yeah, and often I think those scars that you take away from you, if you then start developing a new life for yourself, or you then get married again, you're carrying a lot.
yeah, true.
And it is something that I think should definitely be given more thought to. Um, you know, eh, eh, Often when when I see a divorce case and I look at sort of the wife's family, and then I look at the husband's family, and I think, I know now why it didn't work. They're so different. They're so different, not in terms of where they might come from, but the value system.
Values, yeah.
This family might place a lot of importance to wealth. This other family might be more spiritual. You might have one family where having a son or grandchild is significantly important.
Yeah.
On the other side, you might have a family where education is important. And I think it is, again, it comes back to what I said earlier about having conversations about these points before you consider entering into that, which, whilst are difficult conversations, they actually allow you a more informed decision about what you're entering into.
Do you guide your clients whether they should prioritize their partner or their parents after marriage? Do you give a guidance on that?
Not really.
No.
But my view on that is every single person in your life, I think, has to be given their right, has to be treated in a certain way. Um, and if you find yourself in a conflicting situation where you've kind of got your spouse on one side and your parents on one side, well, you've got to be the person who effectively is trying to convince both sides that you're there supporting and can hear what they are each saying. And your job is to tactily look at this and have a situation where, you've got to understand that it's fine for them not to be on the same page. And I think the mistake is where you're trying so desperate to try and get everyone to get on. They don't have to. You could have two very effective and good relationships with your parents and with your spouse, and have, you hear their differences and have a situation where you think, what, this is something that has to be staged and worked on over time. I don't have to focus on having a sort of a fairy tale situation right now immediately.
Yeah.
Over time, things and people change anyway. But
True.
we force issues, and I think enforcing the issues is where the difficulties arise.
Okay, I'm going to ask a few quick questions, so I would just rather need one word answers. Yeah.
Sure.
What does a divorce cost in UK?
It varies from a few thousand to even 200,000.
Okay. What is the entry maintenance in a divorce?
Again, that would depend on the facts and what the
particular case
income of each of the parties are.
Okay. How can someone fast track a divorce process?
You can't. So the minimum period for a divorce is set by the court is 6 months.
Okay. Can a man legally refuse to provide financial support after divorce?
You can't legally refuse, no.
Okay. Do you see prenuptial agreements becoming more common?
Yes.
Okay. What if a couple has married outside UK and they don't have any registration done here in UK? What is the process there?
So, Mina, if you have married outside of the UK, okay, as long as your marriage has followed the guidance and rules of that country, so say for example you got married in Pakistan, if your marriage followed the laws of Pakistan, your marriage is legally recognized in the UK, and you can invoke all the matrimonial and divorce laws here.
Okay.
In the same way. So you don't have to come here and separately register it.
Okay.
It's a recognized marriage.
Okay.
So when a client comes to me, I always ask them, where did you get married? Did you follow the law of that country? What did it look like? I ask for the documentation and I verify whether that's a legally recognized marriage.
Okay. So when a client comes to you, would you recommend counselling to them instead of going directly to a lawyer?
So we work with lots of therapists, counsellors. They help manage a client, say, for example, when they're just at the decision-making process.
Okay.
But also when they are going through litigation or divorce and they're finding it very difficult, to have a medium there to support them through that. And I think it's extremely important. I also feel that people from the South Asian community don't value intervention and counselling as much as they should. But yeah, we work with some excellent people who are really good at helping you work through some of this.
Okay. So when a client comes to you with an allegation, do you test whether it's true or not?
So as part of the process, Mina, you've got to present your allegation to the court. You have to be prepared to be cross-examined, in a box where a barrister will be asking you questions about the allegation you raise.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important that when you raise an allegation with a lawyer, that your lawyer goes through the allegation carefully, breaks it down, dissects it, and looks at whether the allegation has any merit or not, and if you were cross-examined on it, whether you would be able to substantiate it. And that way we can definitely look at allegations that our clients make and understand whether they have merit or not, and warn them that if, for example, that's a false allegation and they're not being able to substantiate to me,
Yeah.
they can then themselves see that there's going to be real difficulty. And one of the most important things in the family court is credibility and honesty, your integrity. That is what wins you cases. So making allegations of a nature which are false or can't be substantiated is definitely not something we would recommend.
Okay. So I read this term cohesive control. Can you tell more about it?
Yeah, this is something that the courts in this country are increasingly recognizing. Coercive control where you've had abusive behaviors over the course of a significant period of time that you can substantiate to demonstrate the abuse. So, for example, you wouldn't rely on a one-off incident. I'll give you an example. If I've stopped you from having the front door key on one occasion, that might not be perceived as abuse. But if over the course of a longer period of time, I don't give you a key, I don't allow you to open a bank account, I don't allow certain actions, that can be perceived as coercive control. Okay. And I've heard people talk about a myth about whether you can rely, when defining domestic abuse, whether you should rely on a single incident or longer periods of abuse. The short answer to that is the court will take regard of singular incidences. So where there's been one incident in, say, 2016, the court will also look at abuse over the long course of a period of time. So when you meet a lawyer, you go through your whole story, and it's for us to substantiate whether we deem this as coercive control, whether we deem this one incident as physical, whether we deem it as emotional. Okay?
Okay. What is the one piece of advice that you would like to give to someone who's considering divorce?
Use me.
Good one.
That's the best advice I'll give you. Use us. Yeah. No, one piece of advice. I think what I said at the outset, think about what life looks like for you outside of divorce.
Okay.
Yeah, afterwards. If you've definitely decided, try and get out as quickly as you can, because the longer you leave these things, you've effectively wasted more years creating that bitterness.
Yeah.
And also objectively think about what is it that is most important to you. You know, for some people it's the children, in which case, you know, be the person who's going to try and deal with this as amicably as possible for the sake of those children. And I think lastly, always have your eye on the long-term objective. What is it I want for my life as a whole, as opposed to the immediate steps that I need to take?
Okay. And if our viewers want to reach out to you, hopefully they don't have to, but if anyone needs to reach out to you for some guidance, where can they reach out?
So yeah, of course, if they want to reach out to us for either preliminary advice or just guidance, or actually instructions, then my Instagram handle is Top Family Lawyer, and you can find me on that. And equally, we have a website in which you can find details and more reviews about what we do and about us, and that's www.notatajlaw.com.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Naheed.
Thank you, Mina.
It was a pleasure having you here.
It was really nice spending time with you this morning.
Yeah. So guys, we'll leave all the details for Naheed in the description. So if you want to reach out to her, you can. Like I said, thank you so much. You've shared a lot. And I think it would be really helpful for a lot of people watching us today.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people will be walking out feeling empowered.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah.
And to our listeners, if you like this episode, please do subscribe. Do hit that subscribe button. We need your support. And if you feel this information would be helpful for anyone that you know, please share it with them. We're also on Spotify now, so if you want to listen to us, the link is in the description. We have also added timestamps, so if you want to jump to a particular section, please do that. We will see you in our next episode. Take care. Bye.